Welcome to the Providence College podcast. My name is Joe Carr. In this episode, we will hear a presentation from one of the college's most distinguished graduates, Arthur Ryan. Mr. Ryan, class of 1963, was one of the youngest presidents of Chase Manhattan Bank and later became CEO of Prudential Insurance Company. And yes, he is the Arthur Ryan whose name, along with that of his late wife Patricia, is on PC's Center for Business Studies. Speaking on Friday, October 4th at Homecoming, Mr. Ryan shared his insights on the ways in which a liberal arts education can prepare one for success in business. His talk was the keynote address at PC's annual Fiandella Lecture. Arthur Ryan.
It is a delight to be here. It's always a delight to be here. I want to spend a few moments talking about the importance of humanities in the business world. I spent my career in the business world, and I want to reflect a little bit on the impact that the humanities had on me and on my wife and on my family. It's kind of interesting. During my career, I was frequently asked, what courses, what subjects did you have in college that had the greatest influence? And early on, I would talk about mathematics. As was stated, both Liz and I were math majors. I took some business courses in graduate school, though I didn't finish. And I would answer the same. Well, business was important. As I reflected back over time on the things I was doing, while math and business were clearly important, I was able to engage in subject matter like how to learn, how to develop critical thinking skills, what makes a leader, and how do you get people to follow you when you are a leader? Doing the right thing. And as I thought about it, I couldn't remember what class I took that taught me about that. But what I do remember was the experience of studying the humanities. And it was that studying, that experience, that kind of caught up to me and gave me the opportunity in the business world to try them out. So let me cover a little of it. The ability to learn in order to learn. There's a comment by Thomas Friedman, who wrote The World is Flat a decade or two ago, in which he said, in the current age, the only saving grace is to have the ability to learn to learn. Well, I want to bring a more, closer to home example. I remember 14 years ago, a young priest was asked to become president of a college. It's a small college. It's here in Rhode Island. It's a Catholic school. And I looked at his background, and I saw he had majors in philosophy, theology, and medieval history. And I said, clearly a qualification to be a president. No question in my mind that this guy was ready. And of course, he speaks often of that ability to continuously learn. And he was absolutely right. Because it not only allowed him to lead the college, it allowed him to change the college. Today, we have a college that is still embedded in the Catholic faith. It's been around over 100 years. But with the facilities, the faculty, and the students we have today, we're clearly part of the 21st century. So it wasn't only the ability to learn, it was the ability to take that learning and make it happen. And that's what it's about, and that's what he accomplished. And of course, it then led me to think a little bit about what it's like to get a job today. Well, if you interview with Google, they might ask you what your grades were and what your major was, but they're going to ask you about your creativity skills. And by the way, how good are you at innovation? And can you communicate well? And do you work as a team? All of the things that are essential. I had my own experience with that. Most know about my experience with Prudential and Chase Manhattan. That's not where I started. After I graduated, I went into the military. And after 9 undistinguished weeks in infantry training school, they allowed me to go and do something that I probably knew what to do. And I was sent off to the Army Security Agency, which collected data. I think it's called spying. And they were moving away from tabulating machines to computers. And so they said, Lieutenant Ryan, we're going to send you to computer school. This is 1964, when a lot of people got the opportunity to go to computer school. I did. It meant I was going to get a job when I graduated, which was kind of important to the family. And I went to work for a high-flying computer company called Control Data. And in those days, when you designed systems and programs and the like, you generally got promoted every 3 to 6 months because the need for people was enormous. And so at the age of 26, I had over 100 people working for me. But what I learned there and what I applied there was the ability to analyze, to come up with alternatives, to propose solutions, to communicate, to take a technical subject and be able to discuss it with people who might not have a technical background, to be able to deal in various forms of creativity. In other words, I was able to develop those critical thinking skills that are so important in any role in life you're going to have. And again, as I reflected on it, I didn't take a course in any of those matters, but the experience at Providence College. And so, to me, that was the kind of the eye-opener to this marriage of being good at something, whether it's science, math, English literature, business, it doesn't matter. But to be able to marry it with the humanities in order to provide that breadth, that range that Father Shanley just mentioned, was what was really important. And I believed it was essential, not simply important, if you were going to have success. And it didn't matter whether you were working by yourself in a small team or wanting to manage large groups of people. That same skill set was essential for any form of success. And so when I did have the opportunity to move into leadership, I was able to build on some of those attributes, but also learn and apply others, like communication skills. I never forget an employee once telling me, it's great the way you speak, Mr. Ryan, or you're sure people are hearing what you think they are. And I said, I guess that's a better way to look at communication, isn't it? As opposed to my speaking ability is your hearing ability or your listening ability. I also learned the incredible importance of diversity. Diversity by sex, diversity by religion, diversity by color, but equally as important, diversity by thought. People think differently based on where they were raised, how they were raised, and what their experiences were. And it was my job as a leader to take that out of them and direct them to things that we could accomplish as a group. The days of command and control management were long gone even then, and they certainly don't exist today. People are encouraged to think for good reason, because the amalgamation of that thinking is what produces the right solution. Every great solution I've seen has been the marriage of disciplines, not the singular focus. It's always bringing one or more things together that brings the best solution. So the leadership principles I was able to apply to those 100 people at Control Data was equally important when I had 100,000 people working for me. Couldn't do it exactly the same way, but the principles were the same. How I communicated, what I was saying, what tone I set, how I dealt with people, how I encouraged diversity, how I encouraged success of the individual. I remember once talking to a fairly famous basketball player from this neck of the woods. His name is Bill Russell. And it started the conversation. I said, Bill, who's the greatest basketball player ever? And I figured he might say Wilt Chamberlain or Michael Jordan or something like that. He said, me. I said, really? He said, you know how I know? I have one finger short for the number of rings I have. He had 11 championships. He said, now, I understand the objective of basketball is to win, correct? I said, yeah. Who else has 11 championships? Who was the key? Who changed the nature of the game by a big old center rebounding and running the floor? Oh, no, I'm the best basketball player ever by the right measures. And it was an interesting discussion in terms of, and then he started cackling. If you remember Bill Russell, he didn't laugh, he cackled. And it was an interesting discussion on the notion of leadership. That was his form of leadership. And it worked for him. And that it was so important in terms of what I had to adapt, in terms of how I could lead lots of people. And I think the most important challenge I had was really around this whole issue of doing the right thing. Peter Drucker said it best. Management is about doing things right, fast, quick, on budget, on time. Leadership is about doing the right things. That's sometimes a lot harder. And as I learned in my career, sometimes it was very difficult in terms of the decisions you have to make and the way you approach it. But it was the approach that I learned through my liberal arts education. It isn't, a great manager who can make the decision yes or no instantaneously. It's the one that can gather perspective, looking from the outside in, not simply the inside out, as most people like me would do. Those are the things that allowed me, I think, to become a better leader and a better developer of people and more successful in the business world. So if I look back and I think about learning to learn, and I think about critical thinking skills and diversity and communication, doing the right thing, I have to look back to my studies of the humanities. And the blending of that with the discipline I chose with business is what allowed me to do it. Over time, I try to apply it to my own life as well. I was a typical business guy. I worked. I had a magnificent wife and family who tolerated me. I remember one occasion where I was asked in an interview, well, Mr. Ryan, how many countries have you visited? And I said, a little over 75. On the way home that evening, my wife said to me, Art, let me help you. 75 countries, right? I said, yeah. Art, you've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of hotels, business offices, and airports. Exactly how many countries have you really seen? And it was, again, as Father Shanley said, the humanities is about how you live your life. And it was an eye-opener, obviously, in terms of, I could count on one hand, the number of times you took that extra time to go and learn about the people, learn about the country, the culture, and so on and so forth. That was just one example, but it did help me much later in life apply some of those same things that I had learned into my own personal life as I had into business. In my life, I've had 2 marriages. One to a wonderful woman for 54 years. And the second was the marriage of my skills in business with what everything the humanities taught me. And it's called a liberal arts education. And I'm thrilled that I had the opportunity to do it, and I encourage it for everyone. Thank you.
After Mr. Ryan's talk, he was joined on the stage by one of his former professional associates, Liz Flynn, from the class of 1982. They had a facilitated Q&A led by Professor Alex Moffett of the English faculty. Professor Moffett also is director of PC's Development of Western Civilization program.
I'll start with you, Liz, if I may. Art just had a great expression to describe this kind of union of the mathematics and humanities. You said it's not only your ability to learn, but also to take that learning and make it happen. And Liz, I was wondering if you sort of agree with that sentiment about the significance of a liberal arts education and the way that Art just described it there.
Is this working? There we go. Okay. Boy, I was listening to Father Shanley and Art, and I'm thinking they stole all my thunder because a lot of the points they were going to make is similar to how I think about things. But, you outed us as math nerds, Father Shanley did. And I'll have to confess tonight I was the nerdiest of the math nerds in that I pursued more theoretical math rather than applied math. So think of solving proofs rather than any real world problems. So people said, what are you going to do with that? Theoretical math. And so as it turns out, I think my learning as a math major, and I'm getting to liberal arts, but my learning as a math major ended up being a wonderful foundation for business because it really taught me how to think critically and how to apply logic to solve problems. And then I was thinking about the liberal arts discussion that we're going to have tonight, and I actually think a lot of what I learned in liberal arts was just that, is how to think deeply and broadly and critically, and how to, we talk about the disputed question at PC, how to continuously ask questions and question why, and to try to get more and more informed and learn more every day. Talk about learning how to learn, right? I think another thing was how to have healthy debate and to have arguments and to have discussions and to walk away from that not more polarized, but more informed. And I think in today's society that we live in, a lot of us could reflect on that and think it's entirely appropriate, not just for business, but for life, right? And then I think finally for me, the liberal arts, and Art got to this as well, I think he used the same term, is once you can think broadly and learn how to learn, it's then how to synthesize all that together as you think about problems in life and how to get to the kernel of what's important and how to apply that to solve problems. So I think that's relevant not just for a business career, but I think it's really relevant for life, how to learn, how to value people, how to think deeply and critically, how to keep learning. So it was a wonderful experience for me that I'll value forever. So, yeah.
Art, may I ask you a question? I'm an English professor, and I love a good metaphor, and you had a terrific one in your speech. You talked about the union of your math background and your liberal arts background as a kind of marriage. You came back to that theme over and over, and marriages are of course, they're beautiful, they're sacred, they're also difficult. I wonder if you'd like to think more about how, what difficulties there are in marrying those. What challenges do we face when we try to follow that kind of example?
Well, first of all, it comes over time. I mean, this isn't a ha-ha moment. You wake up and say, well, I finally figured it out. I know all of the ingredients of life. It's something you build up over time. As I said, you start off with that which you believe is the chosen field. So it was mathematics and business, and that's what I thought I was good at and what I worked on. But again, as I worked, I found me doing things and learning things that were different. The challenges of it, not unlike a marriage, is when you have legitimate conflict and in which the decision can be viewed right or wrong, but only over time. And I had a number of occasions where, for example, when I came to Prudential in 1994, I was the first CEO hired from the outside in 120 years, big company. Now, that was the good news. The bad news is they went outside because they had problems. And that was the reason you went in. So I walked into a hornet's nest, to put it mildly, of things that were going on, including mis-selling and so on and so forth. And the dilemma was, if you corrected all of the mis-sales at 100%, you might bankrupt the company. On the other hand, if you settled it at 70%, what's the customer going to say about how you treated them? And there were arguments on both sides. And obviously, if you did the 70% and they got angry, that wouldn't work. And if you did 100% and the company went bankrupt, that wouldn't work. So to me, those were the kind of trade-offs between the logic of what the arithmetic said and the emotion that said, do the right thing for the customer. Because at the end of the day, that's more important in the longer run. And we all talk about it. All CEOs talk about the longer run. Believe me, that isn't the way most operate. You don't get a lot of chance for longer runs when they're beating you over the head. And so those were the kinds of things that I saw in my own life that were legitimate conflicts in terms of trying to apply the humanities to my skill set. And in science, God, we see it every day. I'm on the board of a biotech company. Every day, the conflict between science and the humanities. But if addressed in a healthy fashion, to have the dialogue and discussion about it, they're resolvable. But they're not easy. That's the hard ones.
Leslie, would you like to comment on that? Again, the difficulty in achieving that kind of marriage between humanities. Are there challenges that students face?
Sure. A build on what Art had to say. There's many times in your career, in your life, where you're presented with a tough issue, and you might even call it a dilemma, and you're trying to figure out what to do. I will say one aspect of the PC education, it's liberal arts and more, is that, it's the heart and the conscience of this place, in my opinion, which is always thinking of trying to do the right thing. And Art said this, always trying to take care to do the ethically and morally right thing. So I think it might be somewhat easier because we come at it from, it might not be the easy decision, it might not be the less costly decision, but ultimately at the end of the day, you got to stand up and do the right thing by people in particular, but it's sort of built into us, both from our parents, but also from PC, is how important just standing up and being ethically honest and doing the right thing by people. So I made many tough decisions in my career that were tough to take, but at the end of the day, I could look myself in the mirror and say, people might not like it, but it's the right thing to do, and I'm going to take that path.
I'd like to ask you both about the importance of mentorship. You have, what is the significance of mentorship for careers? How can mentors act in such a way as to sort of facilitate the kind of success that you've achieved?
Can I take that one?
You can.
So, first of all, I think having mentors at every stage of your career can be incredibly helpful. Finding someone or multiple someones really who you respect and admire and can act as a sounding board for you and give you advice is just invaluable. And many people say, I understand you're here because you're Art Ryan's mentee, or he was your mentor. And to be honest with you, I actually never thought of Art as my mentor. I really didn't. I mean, I came to New York City as a 21-year-old right out of PC. He was not that old, but he was the EVP, the god in charge of my entire division, with thousands of people reporting to him around the world. So to think that naive little trainee was going to call him up for advice and counsel is a bit far-fetched. But what Art was to me was a brilliant leader, a visionary who I looked up to and learned from. But then in short order, he became something far more powerful to me, which was a sponsor. We didn't call it that back then, but it's different than a mentor, and it's far more rare and far more impactful. And I think generally people think of sponsors as someone in a position of power and influence who stick their necks out on your behalf, who take risks with you, and who advocate you within the organization. And I'll tell you something, Art and his team did that for me in spades and really put me into very stretch assignments very early in my career, which allowed me to advance and to learn far faster than I otherwise would have. And he was way ahead of his time at the time doing that. And he was personally setting the tone across this huge division of the company, which is why he then became CEO in short order. But he took risks with a whole lot of folks, but in particular with women. And it just wasn't done at the time. And there was no big call for diversity. Nobody was counting statistics. It wasn't a thing at that time. And Art really stuck his neck out for lots of people. I could name right now 10 women who ended up having very great careers, really because Art took us under his wing very early on. And again, he was way, way many levels above me. But he said, "Hey, Flynn, don't screw up. I'm going to put you in this role, I remember one time he called me to my office, and I had gone from ops and systems, and he put me in charge of this whole big thing. in the retail bank. The 225 people, I was 27 years old. And I was like, I don't even go to branches. He goes, Flynn, don't mess it up. When he put me in, called me into his office a week later. So what are you going to do? Have you figured this out yet? And I'm like, no. And he goes, good answer. You shouldn't know by now. Go back to it, So he was that kind of guy. And I think, so mentors, sponsorships are so incredibly important. But this guy was way ahead of his time in doing that. And Art, I'll say again how grateful I am for the risks you took with me early in my career. So thank you.
Thank you. I was not known as warm and caring, as she said. But Liz was a special person. As she said, what I did when we started the development program is I would go on the interviews as well, so that I could hear what the students' prospective employees thought and what they think, and also to test my own message about was I getting through in terms of what I was trying to accomplish. And so that's part of the way I got involved with it. I have to tell you one story about Liz Flynn, though. So I'm coming up, and I interview Liz Flynn, and she's very open and bright and has done her homework. And she says, Mr. Ryan, we're both from New York, I said, wow, we have a couple of things in common. I was a math major. You were a math major. I said, right. I said, how are your grades, Liz? She said, I have a 4.0. I said, 2 out of 3. Anyway, it was easy to see. You know what got me convinced that this woman was going to be a great success? It was her passion. She didn't just talk about the job or the money or what she was going to do. It was her passion. It was that I'm going to get it done. I don't care what you give me or what you throw at me. I will get it done. I will engage people. I will work every hour, but I will get it done. That is probably more important than any other attribute I can think of when I interview people, what I want to hear. I don't want to hear how smart they are. I want to know that they care, that they're worried about the results, that they want to see it happen. This lady has it 200%.
Now that we're joining the fan club, each other's fan club here, let's connect that back to PC. A lot of who I am came from my parents and my family, but a lot of the values, the work ethic, was reinforced in a big way here. In addition to that breadth of learning, I totally believe in a liberal arts education, and there's all sorts of talk around the need to specialize these days because the world is so complex. To me, that's the very reason you need a liberal arts education, because it is complex. And if you focus on something technical in your career these days, it's going to be obsolete in 5, right? So you need to be able to have the capacity to think broadly, to deal with all this information being thrown at you, and to be able to keep learning and keep asking questions and then work with others. And you never think you have all the answers. It's, I had 23 jobs over a 38-year career. So throwing in a bunch of different stuff, I never had any of the answers. I just asked the right questions of the people around me. They always had the answers. But you got to have that ethic and that understanding of how to think critically and how to ask questions to solve problems. So I'm very thankful for the PC education and strongly believe in a liberal arts education.
Thank you. Yeah. My last question is about PC, and hopefully we'll have time for an audience question or two afterwards. Looking back at your time here at PC, do either of you have either any regrets about maybe a course you didn't take or something you didn't pursue, or maybe alternatively, is there an opportunity that students have now that wasn't available when you were on campus that you wished had been?
Yeah, I think the Western Civ program would come to mind for me. It didn't exist when I was here at school. Obviously, we had the humanities, we did it, but the way that Western Civ program works is really impressive. And I think it's been important for all students. I was delighted when Sylvia Maxfield kind of, as she said, I'm not only going to work with it from the business school, I'm going to embrace it. And I'm going to find a way in which the business students get the benefit of that Western Civ program as well. I probably would have benefited from that, and who knows, I might have opened my books even more, so we'll see whether that's true.
What about you, Liz?
Honestly, in a question ahead of time, it was, what course would you take over again if you had the opportunity? And I did benefit from having Civ here. Thought it was wonderful and torturous all at the same time. 5 days a week for 2 years was tough, and I certainly remember the Civ party at the end of 2 years. But I'd love to take that again, and I know it's morphed into something more than it was when I was here. But that it's just such a gift to be able to learn across cultures and religions and philosophies, literature, art. And I think why I take it again, you say, why do you take it again if you've already taken it? Well, first, you don't remember all that you might. But I think I'd listen and learn and reflect on it differently today than I did when I was, an 18-year-old kid. So it's just an amazing thing. And I think people love to be finished with it, but I think 20 years from now, you'll appreciate the gift you were given through this, of course.
That's terrific. I think, do we have some time for a few audience questions? And are there mics, I think, that are around in the audience? In fact, right there.
Sir?
Oh, thank you.
Good evening. My name's Leo Latz. I'm from Chicago. I'm the parent of 4 Providence College alumni and students, and I want to thank both of you for all you've done to make the experience amazing for my children. I'm from the Dominican High School in Chicago, Fenwick High School, and 2 of our graduates have echoed what you've said, Mr. Ryan. One is Ed Brennan, who is chairman of Sears, and his brother Bernie Brennan, who is chairman of Montgomery Wards. They didn't go to PC, but they did go to Fenwick High School. And I interviewed them many times and got to know them well, and they both mentored me, and they both said the same thing you said tonight.
Thank you.
When in doubt, do the right thing. So I think that's a Dominican trait. My question, Mr. Ryan, is easier said than done. So when you face situations like that, what criteria did you use to determine what was the right thing?
Well, obviously, you have to deal with your own belief system first. But as I mentioned earlier, that's sometimes not sufficient. And so a couple of things I tried to do to better understand how to arrive at an appropriate solution. First, I tried to put myself, as I mentioned earlier, in the shoes of the customer. Not simply from the investor point of view or from the management leadership point of view, but from the customer. Because I saw firsthand what can happen when you don't do that. As I said, when I joined Prudential, they had a few problems for a few years. They consistently had a 90% approval rating, but by 1996, that rating had dropped to 44%. They had stopped talking to customers. Even worse, they had stopped listening to customers, and they had a lot of them. So that was going to impact the numbers. So that was the first thing I tried to do. The second thing is I tried to engage as diverse a set of employees as I could find to get their thoughts and opinions, even if they weren't experts on the subject matter, just to get different opinions about what alternatives might be and ways to do it. And I'm not just talking about the management team. I'm talking about people at all levels of the organization, because in many cases their experiences are more valuable and are things that I've not seen. And so what I was looking for is give me some insight, give me something I can look at that will help me make a better decision. And then lastly, and in some cases the hardest, was to go to the board of directors or to investors and convince them that the long term is more important than the short term. That is not easy. We all say it, but everybody looks at the stock price the next morning, whether we like to admit it or not. And whether you're in business or politics, it doesn't matter. It is the same fundamental issue every leader faces in terms of trying to do the right thing. Because if you don't do enough right things in the short term, there is no long term. So you've got to do both. And that to me was where the dilemma came about and how I tried to approach it.
We have another audience question.
Hi, my name's Erin. I'm a senior here, English and secondary education. Go English. I'm a really good friend of Nicole's. I can attest to Father Shanley's explanation. She's a really, really wonderful person and a really wonderful friend. You should definitely hire her. My question for you, both of you, is what advice would you give somebody who's graduating from PC this year, moving forward in their life?
Well, thanks. What advice would I give you? I think as you start your career early on, just like you did at PC, you went deep and broad and established a great foundation. I would say when you start a career, whatever that career may be, to think about doing the same thing is to give yourself some time and to think about going deep and broadly to enhance your foundation. Someone I worked for very early in my career said, skyscrapers are built on great foundations. And oftentimes kids coming out of school, they want to get ahead. What's the next job? How do I get this? How do I keep climbing the ladder? And I think people who do that too quickly often burn out or have one set of skills as opposed to a broader set of skills. So I think to have a little patience and to try to go broad and deep, and then, to overdo the skyscraper analogy, but, sky's the limit. So I'd say that, and I'd say the other thing is it's a crazy world. It's very fast paced. And no matter what you do, and this guy had it in spades, is have a sense of humor, have some fun along the way, and don't take yourself too seriously. My mother used to say, never get bigger than your britches, but have some fun and have a sense of humor. And if you take it too seriously, it's a real grind, but it's, have some fun along the way.
Yeah, I would say the only thing I would add to that is clearly when you're going for a job interview, you've got to, do all the basics, do your homework, be prepared to explain who you are as a person, not simply what your record shows, what your interests are and the like. But use it as a learning experience. You're coming out of college. You don't know everything yet. And that's a great opportunity to learn from the people you're talking to. It'll help you to think about, geez, what is it that I really want to do? And how do I get about doing that? So that was the only thing I would add.
Other questions? I think there was a question in front, wasn't there?
Art, I just wanted to say thank you for the naming gift for the business school. And at the time, there were a lot of deserving places across the PC spectrum that would have benefited from your gift. So why did you pick the business school? And secondly, what was it about the due diligence that you did? And I know there was a lot of it that closed the deal for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. When Father Shanley approached me, I told him I wasn't a business major. I was a math major. Go call one of the business majors. And, but he gave me the you're in business and so on and so forth. And he's a very, very articulate man. But he closed the deal when he brought Sylvia Maxfield. I was dead in the water when the two of them walked in the room. I knew it right then and there. Just write the check, Art. Don't even argue. This is a done deal. You've been had. And anyway, Sylvia came in and talked to me about the importance of the marriage of business and the humanities. And it's a subject, obviously, near and dear to my heart. And she believed it. And that wasn't always the case on the campus here. There were battles between business and humanities. I'm sure there still are a few, but they have made it more seamless. Obviously, more and more parents are worried about their kids getting a job, which is why you see an extraordinary increase in business majors and the like. And she runs a great school. So I thought those two things were what were the deciding factor in mind. I think what closed the deal for me is when Father Shanley came back and said, we're going to get rid of the upper and lower campus. This place did not need an upper and lower campus. It needed one campus. Close the street, put a beautiful building. And when Sylvia described what she was going to do to make this a gathering center, not just for business majors, but with the dormitories nearby for all students here, that combination closed the deal for me. And I think, and of course, the really good news is I had nothing to do with the design of the building, thank God. But I couldn't have been more pleased with the finished product. I mean, this is just spectacular, both as a business center, but also a gathering place for students. I've come in here at different times, and there are students all over the place, you know, and they're talking, they're studying, it's a gathering place. And with the closure of the road and the finishing of the rest, campus looks great. So those were the things that drove me and my wife to do it.
Thank you for joining us today. You can subscribe to the Providence College podcast at all the usual places, and they're available on the college's YouTube channel. Feedback is welcome at podcast@providence.edu. Thanks to our producer, Chris Judge. I'm Joe Carr. Until next time.